Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of The Whole Story. I apologize that we're running a little late tonight. I had some technical issues getting my OBS studio all set up and ready to go again because I had to reinstall it. Assuming you guys can hear me all right, somebody let me know that everything sounds good in the chat, and that'd be fantastic. Perfect. Uh, Talking of Stations has sponsors now, so before we dive too deep into the episode itself, I'm going to read off our little sponsorship spiel. We're going to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors for the show. Tonight's episode is sponsored by PushX Industries, the #1 and premier hauling service in New Eden. They currently serve HiSec, LowSec, NullSec, Sovereignty, and Thera, so probably not as applicable to the people watching this particular episode and my guests. Um, but if you need to do stuff in K-Space, they got you. So they cover interceptors and deep space transports all the way up to freighters, and no load is too big for PushX. If you want to get your hauling done quickly and affordably, you can check out their website at pushx.net. And you can also stop by their in-game channel, quote PUSHX, PushX. And with the PushX account, you can follow your contracts in their queue, and all their average delivery times are posted to their Twitter account, PushXNet. PushX would like to say thanks for letting them serve you since 2012. Don't move it, push it. And there's my first sponsorship spiel I've ever had to read in my life, so that's clearly a sign that we're making waves and going places. Joining me tonight, we've got Hyped, Boris, and Hardy. That's your cue to say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, hello.
And so tonight's focus is we're going to be talking about fax piloting, and as well, specifically wormhole-based fax piloting. What I did is, if you're saying, "Oh, that's just a bunch of big groups," you're right. It is for tonight's episode, but it was difficult to find small crews that have fax pilots that I know about at least. So we went around with groups that I know have used faxes in the past. And so we've got Hyped is from Hard Knocks, Boris is from Novak, and Hardy is from MyCorp, the Dark Space Initiative. We're going to start out with some introductions, and so I'm going to let each of them tell you a bit about themselves, who they fly with, how they got there, and then we're going to dig in and start talking about fax machines. So if you'd like to start, Hyped.
Sure. My name's Hyped. I've been in Hard Knocks almost 8 years now. I think 2011. Yeah, almost 8 years. Um, I got into Hard Knocks way back in the day as a drunk invite from Bale and Asen, expecting to be AWOXed, and Bale actually called them off. I was actually scrammed and webbed at the sun, waiting to get killed, and he told them to fuck off. So here I am, 8 years later.
Mic on.
All right. Boris, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Boris Kurova. I've been with Novak for 3 years now. Before, it was a little bit, I basically started the game with Novak. I was in a small C4 corp before, but nothing too serious. And yeah, been playing the C5 game ever since.
All right, these are short and sweet intros. Finally, last but not least, Hardy, you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. I've been with TD for about 2 years, also about the same amount of time I've been in Wormhole space. I joined up with them because two of my IRL friends were there, and they said it was a pretty cool party, so I joined.
Well, I think now it's your turn to have your mic cut out. You didn't quite finish that sentence, Hardy.
couple IRL friends said it was a pretty cool party, so I decided to join up.
It's always a good time. So tonight's focus is fax piloting. I know we've dug around on the kill boards, and I know we've all chatted about it before we got here. So all three of you have flown faxes in Wormhole space at least once, probably many times. And so what I wanted to dig into and really talk about and focus on is why faxes are so crucial to Wormhole space PvP. I'm sure they're fit differently. They fill a somewhat different role than they might out in K space. And so for the people that maybe aren't, I can't tell if they're joking or not, but FAX is short for Force Auxiliary. So we're talking about capital Logi ships tonight. And in wormhole space, they can be pretty big and pretty important. So it's a key component of your larger wormhole corp brawls. When corps throw down with capitals, they almost always bring a fax. So, first question that I've got some questions that, of course, I know the answer to many of these, but the purpose of tonight's to stir up some discussion. Why would each of you define fax pilots or in the fax role as so crucial to wormhole space? You can fight over who gets to go first.
I guess I'll start. I think there's a few big reasons, but I think the biggest reason I'd say is that in general, Wormhole Corps and Wormhole fights are just smaller, have fewer people, and therefore, if you've got 30-man fleets, a single fax is able to do a whole lot of heavy lifting within that fleet, and is able to pretty much keep that fleet up on itself. And then they're huge. They turn big fights or even smaller fights even more. They're a huge influence, and pretty much the most powerful and the logic tool for any corp to bring.
Yeah, like Boris said, it's basically the biggest part of it is you're the sole healer, so to speak, of the group. And if you have someone at a fairly high skill level, you're going to be carrying the whole group as a whole. Whereas if you have 4 to 6 to 8 guardians, you run the risk of people not paying attention if they're multi-boxing or just not as skilled in the Logi role. So
My take on it is the speed of rep application here. So like with a guardian, you have between 12 and 14 seconds, not including ping, server ticks, etc. With a fax, it cuts it down to about 6 seconds.
Yeah, for sure. Fax are the fastest and the strongest and the
like maybe not mass
powerful.
efficiency, it's kind of hard, but when you have 9 guardians worth of reps on the field, but only one person that's pilot, it makes it a lot easier to coordinate your reps instead of trying to get 9 people to do the same thing.
And it's pretty much the only way to go for reps nowadays, especially against Leshaks.
Yes.
Heavy armor should not be supported by subcap Logi.
Yeah.
Not even Zarms?
Not
even
even
Zarms.
Zarms.
Don't even start.
So that was great. We got a couple different answers to that question there, and what I want to do is I want to dig into a couple of them. So I apologize that if I didn't exactly track exactly who said which piece, but one of the things that I think is interesting and a very vital thing to kind of understand about wormhole space faxes is they are in most circumstances the only logistics on field. So when we're bringing capitals and we're jumping through that wormhole with our fleet, it doesn't really matter how big the fleet is. It could be 20 people, it could be 50 people. There is still a single fax pilot that's responsible for repping and hopefully saving the whole fleet as the fight goes on. Has anyone ever flown or looked at a fleet that has multiple faxes, or is that just do you see that as just a waste of the mass?
I think there've been a few occasions. I think the most famous one was an overload this fight 2 years ago. against Hawks, where they brought 2 Archons back in the day of Archons. In general, though, I think for most people the opportunity cost is too high. So the mass that they need to bring the 2 faxes is just much too big. They'd much rather bring a dread or bring a lot more battleships or more subcaps, because obviously the mass of the hull is limited, and usually the single fax, if it's a good pilot, is able to do the work that it needs to be done alone.
I think it could really. I think there is something to say about bringing 2 faxes eventually, depending on how the meta evolves, especially with Lashaks coming out. Because you can bring upwards of what, 50, 52 Lashaks through a hole. But it's there's point to say that when you have a single fax on field and it's getting neuted to all hell, and you're missing rep cycles because of it, maybe bring a second fax, but that's you probably wouldn't even be able to bring enough Lashaks on your own to kill things. So probably not. If anything, maybe some Guardians on the side, but that's about it.
Yeah, the new pressure is the biggest part of that. Having to decide whether you're gonna rep something or rep yourself is, a coin toss in some cases.
So would you say that in wormhole space, one of the most important factors is the cap warfare, capacitor warfare, when it comes down to fighting with faxes?
I'd say it's the baseline to what you have to design anything on wormhole space around. If you look at any wormhole fit, they're all designed to work at 0 cap, which, especially for a fax is very difficult to do because a fax, uses cap for all the repping it does, local and remote. So the way the fits are designed, or where they used a single injector worth of cap to then, instantly get some reps off, either local or remote. But obviously, the more pressure you then put on that fax, the more difficult it becomes for the pilot to shuffle his resources and his cap boosters. So yeah, to simplify the question though, cap warfare, I would say almost everything in wormhole space, with the exception of some Lashaks recently, the bigger fleets, you gotta assume that every ship can be neuted.
I
Yeah,
mean, every
especially
ship has
these
always been
days.
able to be neuted, right? Just might not do much.
Well, even if you look back in the old days, people were using like old days Exuki. You might remember these, the old Proteus days. Not many people actually brought newts until people started deciding Belgorns were the thing to use, even when they were almost a bill a hole. Still one of my most used ships. But nowadays, everything, once it went to the Ham Legion, when that came out, everything's been completely passive. If you think of using an active hardener, an active anything, using blasters, railguns, you're doing it completely wrong these days.
Gotta go for those selectable damage types, am I right?
Oh, how the
Yeah.
times change. I mean, because there was that for a bit, and now everyone's just rocking. What is it? Explosive thermal is pretty much your damage profile for most armor fleets, because that's what disintegrators deal, and we're back to being locked into one damage type. I
Yeah,
mean,
which causes people to start spec tanking, which is a whole nother meta.
yeah, I mean, I remember the Proteus days well, and I think you're right. I mean, I think many many years ago, Balgorns were actually expensive enough that I think the price impacted their usage. Like you saw people bring Geddons, which were way worse, or Newt Legions, which just weren't as effective because just the hull was a billion isk. And it's easy to just go, oh, well, wormhole space is super rich. And it's like, well, comparatively, I'm sure, but back then, I don't think everyone was quite as rich. Um, but the proliferation of cheaper Balgorns was that and talismans was for sure something the thing that Laura's pointing out was talismans. No, it was before that though. Laura's commenting. I mean, we stopped using Proteuses as the mainstay in wormhole space long before Citadels. But it was when Balgorns became everywhere that capital or capacitor warfare really started to become a integral part of wormhole space's PvP meta, I'd say, and I think it's stayed there ever since. So I don't. So there's four different non-faction faxes because I don't think we need to dive into the faction ones since people don't use them that much. Um, I mean, I've seen them several used over the past couple months, but I think we'll focus on just the four Empire ones. Um, what what faxes are all of you guys using? I mean, there's four. I feel like over the years, you've seen some have stuck around, some have shown up and then disappeared again, and there's some crews that seem to like to try to pull off and use newer ones than that maybe aren't the meta air quotes. But yeah, so what faxes do you guys see the most in wormhole space?
Obviously Apostle and Inazu, both for different reasons. Inazu used to be the go-to for a while, just because of the remote rep bonuses, but nowadays you're having to go for Apostle, because of the tank bonus, just because the meta's shifting more towards trying to headshot the facts.
Yeah, the Apostle can go ahead.
Forgive me, I can't remember if it was Novak or Laserhawks, but they threw down a loggerhead on us a few months ago. It was quite the surprise. Somehow didn't show up on Intel, and we didn't know it was there until it showed up on field.
We have
Oh.
elite scouts in TDS, and that's all we need to comment on that.
Oh, don't worry, we fed to the loggerhead.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. It's the Nanazu and Apostle. I know the Lift was popular not 8 months ago, but the fax rebalance really messed.
The lift got gutted by removing the inject bonus. Yeah, the Apostle and the Nazu fill slightly different roles, but I think, like Hift said, the meta is going more towards heavy sustained damage with the presence of Lashax, and the Apostle gets resist bonuses and it gets rep and mount bonuses, which is it reacts a little bit slower, but overall you need to be able to compensate for the heavier damage, and the Apostle does that better.
So I'm gonna dig in here. How would you compare the fax meta now to what the fax to the fax meta before the last round of fax changes? Would you say it's better, worse, just different?
I would personally say it's, I don't know, pretty much the same. I mean, the biggest change is Lashax, honestly. Before, if you were flying a fax, I think most people here could attest to this, is if you made sure your field truck didn't get boosted off or bumped off, you could keep people up pretty much permanently until you ran out of cap charges. Nowadays, with Lashax and spooling, it's a war of attrition.
Now, do you
Yeah.
see that as a positive? And so I mean, so that's a big change, right? Is that more enjoyable meta, less enjoyable?
I mean, I think a lot of people have said publicly that they find that Leshaks are not enjoyable. I think, especially for smaller groups, fighting Leshaks is pretty difficult. And then Leshaks are also, compared to like other strategies like dread blapping or fast switching with Lokis, the older strategies, Leshaks is very N+1 heavy. So the group with the more Leshaks will tend, because they just shoot the same target for a while, it tends to be that the group with more checks has notable advantage. On the other hand, I don't know. I don't think everything has been figured out about them yet, and I'm sure there's still going to be a little bit of meta shift. But at the moment, they're extremely strong for sure. I don't know. I wouldn't judge better or worse too much though in terms of like what's more fun.
Yeah, right now I think we're gonna get. I mean, you could even look at our losses for HK. um, we're going through a big discovery process right now with what the meta should be, and even if we try and come to what the cutting edge meta is right now, it's going to be changing over the next probably 3 to 6 fights, even with Hawks with ourselves, because we're going to get to something maybe equal or slightly better than Hawks, and then they're going to figure it out. And then we're going to get, like, after that 3 to 6 fights, I would say, we're going to get to a point where it's going to be the exact same thing against each other, like tit for tat.
Do you
And
want
it's
to
just going to
dig
be
into that fight? I know I think you had linked. I have the your BR from the 14th with Hawks. Is that something you want to poke into?
is that one of the ones we put in our channel?
Yes.
Oh, that was the one that I didn't fly. Let me see here.
But yeah, what it looks up, fully agree. I think a lot of groups. I mean, we'll see where the Lashak trip takes us. I would hope that if it turns out what people are fearing maybe at the moment, that Lashak becomes like a very omnipotent, strong platform in Wormhole space that doesn't really have any alternatives and no real counters. That would be unfortunate, but I'm sure there's still a lot to be discovered about it. Little fitting changes you can do, counterfitting, um, seeing what sort of weaknesses they have and seeing if you can exploit them. For my part, it's very interesting at the moment to see what the discovery process that I've just talked about, where you have a few more fights, and every time one party learns a little bit more than the other, and then the next fight, um, you try your tactics again that you've been developing.
I was always just worried about the Lashak meta, even looking at them when they were announced before they were even out. I just knew it was going to N+1 counter to each other or fight to each other. I don't think there's really going to be much that faxes themselves are going to be able to do. I think it's going to be tertiary ships. So if you have electronic attack frigates or booshers, something like that, maybe you can try and boosh off some of them with your whole fleet and try and kill what's there. But I
The
think people are
rise
going
of
to
the
find a way
Kitsune.
to. Yes, the rise of the Kitsune.
Kitsunes are glorious. They
Room
punish the
for all
shacks
the
and
new bros. You can let all the new bros join your heavy armor brawls as long as they're in Kitsunes now.
But that's another thing is at what point do you just try and recruit a whole boatload of people like Nullsec? We kind of pride ourselves in being a smaller-ish, in air quotes, groups of people here compared to Nullsec, where you can bring 1,500 people to evict a whole. But that's a whole nother story. We probably only have on a heavy armor fight probably 10, 15, maybe 20 people at most. Everything else, when you see us in 50, 60, 80 man fleets, that's all multi-boxing. So, I mean, unless you bring more people and cut down your own alts, they would have to pretty much bring Lashaks themselves.
yeah, just bring more Lashakals.
And if it's not Lashaks,
N+1.
Ikitursos.
I do think one of the big friction points is the mass on the Lashak, which just allows you to bring, what is it, like 60% more than you can bring, or even more than that, 75% more than you can bring Balgorns or other battleships with similar mass.
Do you think
So
the Lashak is too light?
I definitely think
I'll ask
the
because we had a conversation about this exact topic in my last episode about a month ago, and the consensus with the people I had on was that for its firepower, the Lashak is simply too light. For its mixture of tank to damage output, um, it was it's light, and just like you had said, I mean at 60 60 odd million kilograms, it's 2/3 the weight of a battleship. I can fit 20 to 30 depending on what else I brought over along with the facts. And right now, I know most people are bringing dreads over, but that's a certain amount of Leshaks. I don't think the dreads live long either.
Nah, that's definitely. There's a few things. The other thing I think that's very strong about Leshaks, without really trying to say whether it's unfair or unbalanced or anything, is a Leshak. The gun actually uses a very low amount of cap. So if you compare it to like an Abaddon, we recently flew some Abaddons and we saw the hard difference it was to a Leshak. But a Leshak gun takes less cap than 2 Abaddon guns, for example. So I think a lot of the cap resilience, we were talking about cap earlier, and how there's a lot of neuting, and maybe some people that are listening are asking, why don't you just do it to Leshak's out? But the Leshak has a very, very strong cap resilience, especially fit with batteries. And because the gun doesn't use a lot of cap either, it just kind of is able to hold very well. So that might be another point to work on. I don't know.
Yeah, the shacks are generally, from what I've seen, of all losses, are double cap battery and then newts in the hides. And if push comes to shove, I'm sure people will start putting some NOSes in there if they absolutely have to keep their guns running. But everything else is passive, so it doesn't need to stay on. So you get to that point where you're wasting too much time and effort trying to single out Leshaks to newt. You're just going to run into people switching their fit to be able to just barely keep their guns on, and you're going to be useless. You're going to be wasting your time bringing Bailgorns or excess Bailgorns when you could just bring more Leshaks.
2 more Leshaks for every, well, not quite, but almost.
Pretty close to 2 Leshaks to per Balgorn.
Yeah, to touch on that time wasting though, I think that's where the meta stagnation is going to show up with it. We go from being able to pop the dread, burn down the facts, and then maybe go after the subcaps in between to just pressure the facts down so he makes a mistake, then start burning sub.
It's basically the meta right now is you newt pressure the cap, or sorry, the facts until they're low, and then split up your Leshaks into 2 to 3 groups and just let them spool. That's it.
I don't know how many of you guys were around and flying back before Citadel, but I'd be curious to get any of your thoughts if you had any on how, we're comparing apples to oranges, of course, but how very different today's Force auxiliaries compare to the old triage carriers.
Yeah. I have a pretty drastic stance. I personally don't think. Just to explain, old triage carriers, they were all regen fit, so they would combat refit in the middle of the fight, and when they needed more cap, they'd fit for cap. If they needed tank, they would fit for tank, and they would try to balance that to not run out. I think under today's meta, especially with the amount of theory crafting and min maxing that every group is doing, and with the amount of even with shacks that we're seeing and the amount of Balgorns we're seeing, I think they would not stand a chance. Because every group that does a little bit of math and Pyfa will know exactly how many Balgorns it'll take to shut down an old school triage. And then they'll bring that, and then the fight is over. There's no real you can bring 10 Balgorns to every fight with an old school triage, and if they're all talisman fit, then unless it's some obscene fit, you'll end the fight right there.
Yeah, that was kind of the old days of checkmate for heavy armor fights. Was you just had somebody spamming ship scan, and once you saw that cap hit 0, you just switched to it, and then it's dead. And then I was.
Now, would you say that was so that was way less interesting than today's meta where we've got cap boosters and you can newt out my facts, but with some good timing and some injectors, I'm gonna keep repping right through it.
I would say interesting. I think the old style was very interesting. If you talk to the pilots that did it, they loved the shuffling and the challenge of combat refitting. I just think it's necessary. I think the new faxes and their strength that they have, especially the local tank strength that they have, where they can tank up to 50,000 DPS under new pressure.
I
Even
think
more with.
good.
Yeah, I think it's just necessary. I mean, it's maybe less interesting, more technical to pilot effects now. Maybe less brain power involved and more, muscle memory. But I don't know. I don't see another way.
I mean, I think it's gotten both the old the old days look a little less great the longer time goes on, and we've gotten used to the now. I know for a while when Faxes first came out and before the rebalance, though, a lot of people felt like the air quotes the old days were better because at least the fights would actually end or they wouldn't take so long. Whereas, for a while until everyone started figuring it out, and there was some testing here and there, but for the longest time after Citadel, faxes would usually only die once they actually ran out of cap charges or the pilot gave up. And same could be said, the only way you killed stuff was their fax pilot made a mistake, which on one hand could is an impressive showcasing of pilot skill, but on the other can also I think some people felt like fights started to take too long, whereas some of your armor brawls could be you'd go 20, 30 minutes before anything interesting's actually happened, and that might sound might sound exciting until you've done a whole bunch of them, and then you start to get sick of them. um, any other comments that people wanted to make related to some of those bits before I'll throw us into a different aspect of faxes here?
Nope, go
Nope.
ahead.
All right, so I want to change gears a bit and focus on the actual skills that go into making a good fax pilot. And when I say skills, I'm talking out of game skills. Um, it's easy to have Galente Carrier 5 and be a air quote perfect fax pilot as far as your in-game character sheet is concerned. Um, excuse me. I'd like to pick your brains a bit though. What is it besides, of course, just that they're good at it that makes both yourselves, other people that you consider really good fax pilots, what is it that they do, that they've learned how to do, that makes them you're a good choice to be flying that Force Auxiliary to take your fleet out?
Um, I don't know. I think it sounds dumb, but I think for me personally, um, being a good healer in other games. I was a top 100 ranked Holy Paladin in WoW for 3 expansions straight, and I think especially being in a guild that pushed mythic rating so hard, we usually went down a healer. So there was a lot of trying to pay attention to people, making sure you're not in your own stuff, making sure you got dispels, making sure you're paying attention to mechanics and where you're at and fire on the floor, etc. Um, it gave me a lot more practice in it. Whereas if you're just trying to do logistics in Eve, you don't have nearly as many fights, nearly as long, nearly as you're not doing it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours straight like you would in some other games.
So you would say that your hours of healing people in other games have prepared you for this ultimate spaceship healing?
Yes, it's definitely helped muscle memory and knowing where to look, when to react, etc. Stuff like being able to look at what's up on your screen, what you have locked, who's on your watch list, look at ranges in your overview, look at what's coming at you, look at what's going away from you. Um, Being able to actually use your hotkeys to lock and unlock people at the same time. You can't be right click unlocking people. That's just dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To
you
add
gotta
to
get
that, maybe.
the
Sorry, you go
claw
first,
on
Hardy.
your like control key and your function.
Oh, you guys use hotkeys?
Actually, use pedals, right?
I use the racing wheel. No,
No.
I believe it's what it's so muscle memory. It's what control shift click is unlocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't have the video ready. I'll dig it up at some point later, but this just reminds me of I want to say like 2 years ago, uh TD got called to like come to help fight alongside John Dune, whose home system was getting shot at by Mouth Trumpet Cavalry and actually I think it was a ruse cruise and maybe Mouth Trumpet showed up and I think HK was there towards the end. But afterwards, they released a video with their fax pilot's POV, and one, their fax pilot wasn't using hotkeys. So like he'd be like locking everything up using his mouse with right clicking people to say lock, and then he'd like click them and then go down and press his button. And it was both infuriating because of how slow he was, and he was rushing to the point where you'd watch his mouse and he'd miss pressing the repper, and then the people would just blow up because he didn't rep them. So I'll see if I can dredge that link up at some point if you want to get some
I
eye
think I
cancer
remember
of
that.
bad fax piloting.
Yeah, I
It's
saw that.
painful to watch. The dude
I
got
had to log
absolutely
off.
hazed. Yeah.
But I mean, like, it just demonstrates that like you can have a perfect fleet. You can have the best FC and a whole team of people that know exactly what they're doing, and your fax pilot will literally make or break your entire fleet.
Yeah, it's for sure. It's a huge aspect. I think that's where a lot of the skill gap comes from between the different groups in Wormhole Space when you have like some of the bigger groups and more established
Oh,
groups and then new guys.
heroes in the Twitch stream already picked up the video. So I don't know if they had this bookmarked, but I'm gonna see if I can pull
They
this up
better
for the
have.
stream.
Yeah, I think that's where one of the big differences between some of the established groups, I should say, and newer groups comes from because fax pilots, very good fax pilots, are very hard to come by, and most corps have just a couple. I know that we have like 2 fax pilots, maybe 3, and I'd say most Wormhole groups that we fight, they don't have a lot either, and a lot of maybe newer groups, smaller groups, don't have a fax pilot of that level at all, and it's just hard to get to that skill level. It takes a lot of practice. Takes quite a lot of fights that you will inevitably lose, and
Yeah, there's no real good way of practicing it inside of Eve, honestly. I think maybe trying to be like a logi anchor kind of helps you pay attention to other things while you're also trying to rep people would help.
yeah, for sure. Just in general, practicing the multitasking um, is really important. Being able to pay attention to different things at the same time, and then getting that muscle memory down to where you don't have to think about the repping anymore and the inject repping, but you have some practice in it, so you can concentrate more on what's going on in the field, who you have to lock up.
But for reasons I don't fully understand, I can't get my YouTube video to properly play on the stream. But I'll include it in the write up when that gets released alongside it later. But if you're watching now, it was linked in chat, and it'll be there. It'll be there later. You can watch some fax pilots try to lock people up, miss pressing his F1 and F2 keys to give reps, and then the people he's locking just explode.
Yeah, you are right though, Boris. It's difficult to actually be able to practice it in game if you don't have the 80 people to follow you up on CC or in can't simulate it effectively, and you just fall off.
So that was actually one of the questions I did want to ask you guys. If it's not OPSEC and it's something that you can or would share with us, I was curious if either yourselves or your corporations, do you do practice for your fax pilots? I know, in TD Sin, one of the things we've struggled with, and I'm sure, sometimes the answer is at some point you just throw somebody in the hot seat and go, is we don't have a lot of confident fax pilots, and so it's on numerous occasions we've either been unable to take the fight, or we've had to, ask that we downship from capitals just because we can't get a fax pilot online. And it's not because we don't have faxes, it's not because I don't have pilots that can sit in it, but something we've struggled with in the past was trying to get pilots comfortable enough to hop in the force auxiliary and actually go make or break that fleet, because it's a tall ask, right? I mean, we've enumerated multiple times here that a bad fax pilot's gonna sink the fleet real quick. So I'm curious, do you guys practice? Is that just a problem that you guys haven't had, or if it is and you want to share, how have you guys worked on, honing the skills of your fax pilots?
We definitely practice with all caps a lot. I think, especially faxes, we were lucky that we had, two pilots that came to the corp that were already good fax pilots. But some of them have gone inactive, and we invest a lot of time into getting, in general, faxes, dreads, all these ships trained up, and getting people to do it before they jump into a fleet. And it takes some it takes a lot of time, it takes some effort, also getting people motivated, because CC is boring and you're just sitting there being like a target for someone. It's not super interesting, but we try to do it as well as we can. It's obviously never the real thing.
I think for us, I don't personally practice ever, um, except for a few times where we were testing out a rev fit for tanking. I don't remember if it was for heavy armor or if it was for tanking a super cap forward as our. That was pretty much the only time I remember actually testing or practicing. I think most people in HK just can kind of perform when the time comes. Most of our time, or at least a lot of my time, is theory crafting, thinking of what's going to come or what could possibly come through that other wormhole. What could other people do? What could I do better? How could I make my fit better? Stuff like that.
I found Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution is a great simulation for being able to fly.
It's honestly not that far away.
I mean, so would everyone agree that fax piloting is one of those Eve skills that probably relies on you being pretty good at being twitchy and able to very quickly respond to things moving around on your UI? I mean, that's because a lot of Eve is in fact not terribly twitchy. I mean, Eve is not inherently a super high APM game in most of the time, I'd say, compared to um, a lot of other games, and we can meme on it on my corp, because I know we're notorious for this. But in a lot of fights, depending on what ship you're flying, it is as easy as keep at range or approach on your FC, lock up targets that he's broadcasting, and pressing F1. Um, and so, but not for the fax, of course. The fax is very high APM, very twitchy. Um, So would you all say that people that are good at Twitch responses, stuff in games, are going to be good fax pilots, or at least the start of?
I would say so. I mean, even for myself, like you heard, like I was top 100 paladin, usually healing with -1 healer. An aside to that, I also played StarCraft 2. I got to Diamond before they had Grandmaster. I also played um, in Cal I in Counter the Cyber Athlete Amateur League, BS, that kind of thing. We usually won those kinds of tournaments. So I'm kind of used to that twitchy game type thing.
I'm hearing a lot of, if you're good at other video games, you might be good at being a fax pilot out of you, hyped.
Well, I don't know. Other people who know me, like a lot of games that I play, I usually end up putting way too much time into it and becoming really good at it. Like some of the other games we play is Tanks, World of Tanks, and I'm a Unicum in that too. I don't know. I'm just used to putting time and effort into something and trying to figure out how the best way to play it is.
I think
Yeah,
it's
I
rooted
think.
in dedication.
Yep.
Because like he's brought up, being a top 100 arena paladin healer, like what your class does, that it's going to be a big burst heal. You don't have a whole lot of heal over time. In this case, for the fax, it's a 3.2 second cycle time. You know how long your lockup time is. You probably know how long it takes for the Phoenix that's on the other side to cycle. You have to figure out when that alpha wave is going to come in and if it's going to line up with your next rep. Am I within a server tick so that I can actually effectively use the cap that I'm using for my cap?
you got to be dedicated and you got to be a bit of a nerd for sure. And I definitely agree with Ife that you got to be twitchy and like fast paced. It's probably nothing for a chess player, but obviously you don't have to have played other games. I'm sure that would imply that, but
You did just
um,
imply you have to be a nerd to be a good fax pilot, though.
definitely have to be a nerd.
What
to
if
be a
I
good
play
player.
even I'm not a nerd?
Then you don't exist.
Oof.
No, jokes aside, I think you just I don't know. You gotta put time and effort and thought into fitting the facts, into understanding how it works, into flying it. It's very high level. It sounds cliche, but I would say wormhole fax piloting is one of the most difficult things you can do in the game. That's not like politics or metagame or something, but like mechanically speaking. And I think the people that are good at it have all in all put a lot of work and thought and practice into it.
Alrighty. Well, we've touched on a bunch of this already, but a question I wanted to throw out for you guys. What would you tell to someone that wants to be a fax pilot but isn't quite there yet? Like, not in-game skills, because obviously that answer is we'll train up carrier 5 of whatever fax they want to fly. What would you tell people that are either trying to get better at being a fax pilot or are looking to kind of break into that line of gameplay?
Use it. Get it and use it and practice if you can, if you've got friends. But just you got to drop it and you got to lose a few for sure to learn it. But the more time you spend doing it, the more it'll help you.
Yeah, just do it. Really. I mean, that's the best you can do. And I think someone was talking in Praise Bob, I think, about our expensive fits. Like, you don't need expensive fits. You can do with meta reps and T2 and meta mids and maybe some like seat type invul or not invulns, enams or even faction enams. Like, you don't need anything too crazy to stay alive, especially against other people that aren't in the top like 5 or 6 corps, I guess you could say. Like, if you're fighting like, I don't want to like shit on anybody, but like some of like the middle tier corps, lower tier corps, you can deal with not having those super min maxed faxes. Like, putting an extra 10 to 15 bill in your fax is only probably gonna, I'm just throwing random numbers out here, probably another, I don't know, 10%, 20% bonus out of it. Like, it's not a huge return on investment.
I
No,
would
for sure.
think that min-maxing your fax is probably, ISK-wise at least, is probably only worthwhile once you know what you're doing, right? An expensive fax is not a substitute for experience. Um, I think what I would tell people is, the rest of your fleet might not like you for it, but if you're really seriously struggling trying to figure out how to break in, I think Boris said, and you guys have said it best, the only way you're going to get better is you got to get out there and do it. Um, and it doesn't need to be super, super expensive, but, get in a triage, go try to save your fleet, probably try to take a fight that at least looks like you're gonna get to use the fact skills. But you can't substitute, at least in this instance, and in most instances, I'd say in Eve, you can't substitute actual experience and practice with spending ISK on it.
And corps out there support your pilots if they want to work on it or if they want to do it, or if you have an SRP program, you have a bit of money lying around in Corp Wallet, then help out your fax pilots because if they want to learn, they're going to lose a few.
You could even do something like, if you have another corp that wants to kind of train their fax pilots, you could do like fax versus fax and like 15 other dudes. Like, yeah, things might not die, but you'd get the hang of it. You'd actually be on the field and repping people.
Yeah, you can try it on CC. You can like sit at 0 velocity and shoot stuff with dreads to get some damage on. There's a bunch of stuff you
Mhm.
can do to practice.
So,
But
Study the
on,
tape, honestly, because like everybody wants to go post their video to YouTube.
yeah, but on CC you don't get spaghetti.
It's true.
if
That's
you
the
want
biggest
to
killer of
answer
faxes.
this, does your corporations each have some sort of SRP or some sort of SRP program around for your fax pilots?
Yeah, we do. After the fight, usually there's a small application process, but they usually get 100%.
Yeah, we get almost 100%. We've recently upped it as well. We like our fax pilots.
We 100% SRP.
Well, now you know other corps love you fax pilots.
I mean,
I
I
think
think it's
even like
just
some nullsec people do like almost 150% or 200%, like Logi SRP or something like.
um,
A lot of the ones I seen was 100% plus like 15 mil just to entice them.
so it sounds like everyone's in agreement that making your fax pilot not have to worry about replacing his fax is a good way of drawing out competent pilots to save your fleets.
Yeah. You got to pick obviously the ones that have the dedication and not just the ones that log in every once in a while, take the free fax and feed it. But yeah, definitely the people should not have to worry about their wallets when they put in the work.
That was
And
part of the reason why I got into Logi in Eve itself. Like, I was just one of the basic boys who took a Tengu or a Legion, or if you look at my top kills, I think number 3 or number 4 on my top used ships right now is still the Belgorn. Like, I love the Belgorn back in the day, but then there was a point where we needed Logi pilots and we had 100% SRP on Logi before we had a lot of money, whereas everything else was like just the whole price. So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna fly Logi from now on, and here I am. So you may find something in Eve that you like better.
So I think the last question I'm gonna ask, and we'll move towards wrapping up. Besides yourself, and maybe I suppose it can be someone else that's here tonight. Who would you consider the best fax pilot in wormhole space?
oh, that's cruel. It's like
Because all three of the people that you're bouncing on your head are all staring at the stream right now, waiting to hear their name, Boris.
now the person that isn't listening that I might be talking about, but I think there's like 2 or 3 in HK that are extremely good. There's 2 or 3 in Hawks that are extremely good, and
I mean, so
for
you
us
can
it'd
rattle
be
off a
Charging
couple, right?
battery.
But I think in wormhole space, really good fax pilots can tend to be almost as well known in some cases. I've found at least as FCs. Um, I'll let you guys throw the names out, but there are several fax pilots that I know that fly with Novak or Hawks. And obviously I know some of ours, but I know their names even though they're not usually someone you actually they're not somebody you're talking to, they're not a diplo, they're not usually the FC, but they're still names that you see online and you see in that fax pod and you're like, well, their fleet knows what it's doing.
I think Exo's the best fax pilot,
That's
hands
a
down.
lie immensely. I've been a fax pilot I think 3 times and I've lost all 3 of them. Although
I wasn't even there for that fight, and I had anxiety about it.
What silence like Exo's being the fax pilot, and you're just like, oh, there goes the fleet. I'll prep the SRP forms.
Right. Zurach Gazer, I think is his name, is the dude that lost like 16 and then the 19 billion ISK fax for Laserhawks. I think by the numbers, he's probably the.
Yeah, he's pretty fucking good.
Please stop. I'm almost done.
Yeah, I like going neck to neck with Zoo.
Alrighty. Um. So I think that's what I had. Any other comments or questions that you guys want to throw out there before we wrap up?
Nope.
I'm good.
Good.
Alrighty. Well, thank you everybody that came out to watch us live, and thank you for everybody that's gonna listen and or watch this later in a recording. I want to thank Hyped, Boris, and Hardy for coming out to talk, and this has been episode 5, talking about faxes in wormhole space.
Thanks,
So,
Axel.
have a good night, everybody.
See ya.